So I think that what we're seeing is a realization that China is in the next phase of its growth and has to be different from the growth that we saw over the last 10, 15 years. And I think this is important because it shows a maturity in China which is necessary. And I could go on and give examples of what's going on in the high-tech area, but I think you're all very much aware of that. Now I'd just like to get to financial sector reform, because a lot's been achieved in the last decade in financial sector reform. Much needs to be done. We've seen the major state-owned banks, exception Agricultural Bank, which will come next, but 3 of the major state-owned banks, actually 4 when you consider the 3 major state-owned banks, plus the mixed bank Communications, which is also now being classified as a major state-owned bank, that they've gone to the market. They've raised IPOs very successfully. We've just seen CITIC Bank go and very successfully to Shanghai and Hong Kong. And this is just, I think, typical of what is going to be happening with the whole banking community, the ability to raise money to wipe out the non-performing loans. But what's important is you don't create new non-performing loans. So that gets down to the areas of good risk management, corporate governance, transparency. And I think the idea of having a management that responds to the board, and the board must be an independent board. And these, I think, are major reforms that we're just seeing the beginning of. But if China is not to replay the big bailout that occurred to get these banks to the market, and the creation of more NPLs, particularly with this growth in money supply, I think it is very important that these reforms take hold and actually be improved upon. This is one of the reasons that we were allowed to go into Guangdong Development Bank to work in those areas. And I think a major improvement is taking on these boards international bankers who have experience in these areas. So I think that has been a major improvement, but much needs to be done. I think the CBRC, which is a regulator in this area, has done a good job, but it must consolidate more. And this is an ongoing situation. And so watching what happens in financial sector reform in China, I think, will be an indication of the ability of China to move ahead globally in the coming years. One of the other things I would like to talk about is what China needs to do in other areas of the financial sector other than the banking sector. Although it's fair to say that in the banking sector is the most important single element of the financial sector, because 90% of financial flows in China still go through the banks. What is needed here is more balance. China has to do much more on opening up securities firms. Really more emphasis needs to be made on the creation, formation, and the development of a local bond market, because there is too much reliance on the banking system. You may be surprised to hear a banker say that, but that's true. You need more balance. And so these are things, I think, to watch as we go forward, what the government does with the securities industry, what it does in pushing the formation of a domestic bond market. Also, I think there needs to be more liberalization of interest rates, of market rates, so that they reflect the actual risk that the institutions are taking when they lend out, because this will avoid the creation of another pool of non-performing loans. And we all have in mind how important this is, because we all know the story of what happened to Japan when they sat on it and lost themselves a decade of growth. China cannot afford to do that, and the leadership is well aware of that. So I think these are some of the next steps that need to be taken in financial reform. One of the things that bothers me, and I think bothers all of you, is the growing protectionism and nationalism we see in the world. And I think it's very important that the United States continue on the road to open markets, but China also. And there is a backlash in China, as you're all aware, particularly in the financial area, but in other areas also, to some of the foreign investments that have been made in the financial sector, in the banking system. But I think it's important that China continue to open up, because it'll give it, as I said, the sound base it needs to move forward. And where all of these reforms in the state banks, local banks are very important, I think the foreign banks can play a very good role because they can act sort of as a catalyst, a source of competition for the domestic banks. And so I think that's the role of an institution like the Huachi Bank, Citigroup, Citi in the country. I think, as I said, the protectionist situation we saw in a number of cases here, and so I think this is an area where the two countries have got to work together. And I come then to the importance of the strategic economic dialogue that President Bush and President Hu Jintao decided to embark on last year. And I'm sure you'll be hearing much more on that by Hank Paulson, who has done a great job in moving this along. And as you know, Hank knows China. The Chinese feel confident with him, and I think it's important now that we see some breakthroughs in some of the issues that are on the table. So what would I say to China? You must continue to move ahead as you are. Continue to push the financial reform, the opening up process. Don't let protectionism and nationalism gain a strong foothold in China, because it'll only be to the detriment of the growth in the economy going forward. China is also, finally, is a tremendous force now internationally. That wasn't true at the time of the Asia financial crisis. Maybe in Asia, but elsewhere it wasn't. Today, in Latin America and Africa, areas that I travel to quite often, it is a major force. I happened to be in Beijing in November last year when 48 heads of state from Africa were there. And I spent some time with my old friend Thabo Mbeki, who's the president of South Africa. And he said, Bill, we're here because China is interested in us and cares about us. And you can say what you want to about anything else, that's why we're here. It's never happened before that you've had 48 heads of state of Africa meet outside of Africa. This gives you an idea of how the Africans think about China. And in Latin America, they've been a tremendous influence over the last couple of years and will continue to be. So China has a role to play. One of our colleagues in government, as you know, referred to China as a stakeholder last year. Well, I think they are a stakeholder, whether they like it or not. And so I think it's in their interest to see stability worldwide and to work with all the major players. Finally, I would just say that I think you're going to see a tremendous flow of money now, not only into China, where there have been records for the last decade and a half of flows from outside of China into China. You're going to see it reverse the other way, because you're going to see the creation of a number of multinationals of Chinese origin. And they will be moving worldwide in all areas. And we've started to see that. So the next decade will see a major push by Chinese companies internationally. Just in the banking area, as you know, Bank of China has been the traditional overseas bank of China. I was just with President Yang of ICBC, and they bought control of Bank Halim in Indonesia, and they are very interested in expanding throughout Asia and globally. So we're going to see the Chinese banks open. And I, for one, feel that, that we in the United States, the authorities here, have to give more ability of the Chinese banks to open branches here in the United States. At the same time, the Chinese have to be open to allowing American institutions to expand there too. So I think this is an agreement that both sides need to have as we move forward. So in closing, I would just say I'm an optimist on China. There are problems there, and the progress that has been made is incredible, but you can't look at the past, you can only look at the present and the future, and that is a challenge of President Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao, and we all have a stake in the success of what happens in China. 谢谢。